Hello there. I've continued to think about the temptation to Jesus in the wilderness to turn the stones into bread for his own provision. Perhaps you might think it was simply to meet his own need, but perhaps it was part of his thinking about how his ministry would develop. So when I was thinking yesterday about the amazing generosity of God demonstrated when Jesus turned so much water into wine, I've then, over the last 24 hours, been thinking about the things that Jesus did that were actually similar to the things he was tempted about in the wilderness. And yet, in the wilderness, doing them would have been sinful, but in the rest of his life it wasn't. For example, he fed 5,000 people with a very small amount of food, multiplied it up to a vast amount, so that 5 loaves and 2 fishes, it's in Matthew 14:13 onwards, 5 loaves and 2 fish turned into enough to feed 5,000 and 12 baskets full of pieces left over. It multiplied up, and the feeding of the 4,000. The next chapter, in chapter 15, verse 32 onwards, they had 7 loaves and a few small fish for 4,000, and they gathered up 7 baskets of broken pieces. This was similar to the thing that happened in the wilderness. Provide for yourself. Provide for others. Here, Jesus provided for all these people out of compassion. And then the miraculous things that Jesus did. All right, he didn't throw himself off the temple pinnacle, but he did walk on the water across the lake. And people wondered how on earth he'd got across the lake, because they knew that he hadn't got into the boat with his disciples, and then suddenly at the other side of the lake, there he was in the boat. And he performed amazing miracles in front of people. Spectacular things. So why was it that in his ministry those things were right, but in the wilderness they were wrong? And we know that Jesus is King and ruler of all. So ruling all the world is not sinful. What was sinful about the temptation was that in order to gain that power, Jesus would have had to worship the enemy, our enemy, God's enemy, the devil. So what made these things Jesus did good and the temptation things bad? And as I've thought about it, the only answer I've come up with, maybe you come up with a better answer, but for me the answer is the source of the instruction to do the things that Jesus did. Jesus said that he only did what the Father told him to do. He was obedient to the instructions of the Father, and he didn't listen to the enemy's instructions. And this points out that it may well be the right thing to do something, but it might be that the temptation is at the wrong time in one's life or is from the wrong source. When we're doing things out of obedience to God and to Jesus, and that something is not necessarily right or wrong in itself, but it's the source of the desire to do it. Why did Jesus want to feed all those people? It was not so that they would think he was a wonderful miracle worker. It was because they were hungry and they'd gone without nourishment for a long time, and they would have a long time yet if they had to go back to find a source of food. And he had compassion on them and fed them. And when he walked across the lake, did he walk across the lake just to show that he could walk across the water? No, he walked across the lake to rescue the men in the boat and to bring them to safety. So it's something to think about, There's another verse in Scripture that says everything that is not of faith is sin. That we walk a walk of faith, a life of faith. And the things we do in response to God, and not in response to our own desires or to the desires of those who might want to manipulate us. How often people said to Jesus, perform a sign, do something, prove you are who you say you are. And in response to that kind of request, which was very similar to the request in the wilderness, Jesus did not do any sign. He refused. He could have proved who he was to them quite easily by doing something spectacular. But he doesn't want to do that because he wants us to walk by faith. He doesn't want us to have. He wanted those people to change their view, to genuinely want to know who he was, rather than to want him to do something spectacular for their amusement. That's my thought for the day anyway, that not everything we're tempted to do is a sinful thing. May not be a sinful thing at all. It may just be coming from the wrong source, the temptation coming from the enemy, rather than an instruction coming from God. So, my thought for the day. I hope it's helpful. I hope you'll be blessed today. And as we bring every thought that comes to us captive to the cross of Christ, I think that means we can say, Lord, I've got this idea. Is it from you? Is it from you? Will you confirm it? Is it from you? And I'm sure that God, if it is from him, will confirm it. Either by someone else saying the same thing to you, or by someone talking about something quite unexpectedly, and it just endorses the thought that God has put into your heart. So my thought for the day. I'll see you tomorrow, I hope. God bless you. Bye-bye.